The leaf that conquered the world. The story of tea is not just the history of a beverage, it's a story of civilization itself. According to Chinese tradition, tea was discovered nearly 5,000 years ago by the legendary Emperor Shennong, who was celebrated as the skilled farmer, herbalist, and a scientist. One warm afternoon, while boiling water beneath the wild tree, a gentle breeze carried a few leaves into his pot. Curious, he tasted the golden colored liquid. Instead of discarding it, he found the drink refreshing, aromatic, and energizing. Whether the story is entirely true remains uncertain, but one fact is beyond debate: China is the birthplace of tea. For centuries, tea remained a closely guarded treasure, growing naturally in the mist covered mountains of southwestern China. Initially, it was not consumed for pleasure. Ancient Chinese healers believed tea possessed remarkable medicinal properties. It was used to aid digestion, improve concentration, reduce fatigue, and cleanse the body. As knowledge spread, tea gradually evolved from medicine into a daily beverage enjoyed by scholars, monks, and members of the imperial court. Tea rise accelerated during the Tang dynasty, often called China's Golden Age. Trade flourished, cities expanded, and art and literature reached new heights. Tea became deeply woven into everyday Chinese culture. The scholar of Lu Yu wrote the world's first book dedicated entirely to the tea, the classic of tea, more than a guide to brewing. It celebrated tea as an art, discussing cultivation, preparation, water quality, and the philosophy beyond the drink. Tea was no longer simply something to consume, it had become a way of life. Buddhist monks also embraced tea, long hours of meditation demanding unwavering concentration, and tea helped them remain alert without the intoxicating effects of alcohol. As monks traveled across Asia, they carried tea seeds, cultivation techniques, and brewing traditions with them. One destination would forever change tea's history, that's Japan. According to 19th century, Japanese monks returned from China introduced tea to their homeland. At first, only monks and the imperial court drank it. Over time, tea became deeply connected to Japan's culture, eventually giving rise to the famous Japanese tea ceremony. Even movement from preparing the water to serving the bowl symbolized harmony, respect, purity. Tea had become more than a drink, it had become a philosophy. Meanwhile, China continued protecting one of its most valuable resources. Tea cultivation methods remained a closely guarded secret. Foreign merchants could buy dried leaves, but they were forbidden from learning how the plant was grown and processed. For centuries, China maintained an almost complete monopoly over the world's tea supply. That monopoly made tea one of the history's most valuable commodities. Caravans transported it along the Silk Road into Central Asia, while ships carried it across Southeast Asia and beyond. Soon, merchants from distant lands began hearing stories of an extraordinary drink unlike anything they had ever tasted. They wanted tea, but obtaining it would prove far more difficult than they imagined. When European traders finally reached China's shore, they would ignite a global obsession that reshaped trade, politics, and balance of power itself. For centuries, tea remained one of the China's greatest treasures, while traders carried silk, porcelain, and spices across Asia. Tea was still largely unknown in Europe. That changed during the early 17th century. The Dutch East India Company, one of the world's first multinational corporations, began importing small quantities of tea from China. At first, it was an expensive luxury enjoyed only by wealthy merchants and aristocrats. Because it was rare and costly, many Europeans believed tea possessed medicinal qualities. Doctors recommended it for everything for headaches and stomach alignment to fatigue. But it was not the Dutch who would make tea a global obsession. The honor belonged to Britain. Tea arrived in England during the mid 1600s, but its popularity truly exploded after Catherine of Brenzing, of a Portugal princess and lifelong tea lover, married King Charles II in 1662. Unlike many people at the English court, Catherine drank tea every day. Her influence quickly turned the beverage into a fashionable symbol of elegance among Britain's super classes. What began as a royal habit soon spread throughout London. Tea houses opened across the city and merchants rushed to meet the glowing demand. Before long, tea had become Britain's favorite drink. The timing could not have been better. At the height of the Industrial Revolution, millions of workers labored long hours in factories, mines, and shipyards. Tea provided a safe alternative to polluted drinking water, while its caffeine helped people remain alert throughout the exhausting workdays. Unlike alcohol, which had long been consumed because clean water was often scarce, tea improved concentration and productivity. Its quality transformed daily life. As Britain's appetite for the tea grew, so did the profit of the British East India Company. The company became the exclusive importer of tea in Britain, controlling one of the most lucrative trades in the world. Ships traveled thousands of miles between China and Europe, carrying enormous cargoes and tea leaves that were worth fortune by the time they reached London. To reduce taxes, smugglers secretly landed tea along Britain's coastline, creating a thriving black market. At one point, historians estimate that more tea entered Britain illegally than through official trade. The government responded by lowering taxes, making legal tea more affordable, and increasing consumption even further. By the 18th century, tea had become Britain's national drink. As tea became more common, it also called Britain's social customs. In the 1840s, Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, complained of feeling hungry between lunch and the late evening meals. She began requesting tea, breads, the cakes, and small sandwiches in the afternoon. Friends soon joined her. What started as a personal habit quick became a fashionable social gatherings among the British aristocracy. Thus, the tradition of afternoon tea was born. Even today, elegant hotels across Britain continue this centuries old custom, serving tea alongside delicate pastries, and finger sandwiches. But while Britain celebrated tea, trouble was brewing across the Atlantic. In Britain's American colony, tea remained popular, but colonists increasingly resented the taxes imposed by the British government. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving the British East India Company special privileges to sell tea directly in the colonies. Many Americans viewed the law as another example of unfair taxation without representation. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised themselves as Mohawk warriors and boarded three British ships anchored in Boast Harbor. Working throughout the night, they grew 342 chests of teas into the icy water. The event became known as the Boston Tea Party. The financial loss was enormous, but the political consequences were even greater. Britain responded this harsh punishment, hoping to restore order. Instead, the incident united the colonies. Within 2 years, the American Revolutionary War had begun. Tea had become far more than a beverage. It had become a symbol of freedom, resistance, and political change. Meanwhile, Britain faced another serious problem. Near all of its tea still came from China. The Chinese emperor wanted payment in the silver and had little interest in British manufactured goods. As a result, enormous quantity of silver flowed out of the Britons every year, creating a growing trade imbalance. The British government and the East India Company searched desperately for a solution. Eventually, they turned to a product that would have devastating consequences: opium. British merchants began exporting opium grown in India to China, where millions became addicted. The profits from the illegal drug trade were then used to purchase Chinese tea, balancing Britain's trade deficit. The strategy generated immense wealth, but it also punished China towards one of the darkest chapters in its history. The conflict that flowed would change the global tea industry forever, and it would eventually lead Britain to grow tea far beyond the boundaries of China. By the early 19th century, Britain's growing addiction to tea had created an economic crisis. Years after year, Britain's merchants purchased enormous quantity of Chinese tea, paying almost entirely in silver. Meanwhile, China had little interest in buying British goods. As silver continued flowing out of the Britain's, the trade imbalance became increasingly unsustainable. To reverse the situation, the British East India Company expanded its illegal opium trade into China. The effects were devastating. Millions of Chinese citizens became addicted, and the social and economic consequences spread rapidly throughout the country. Determined to stop the crisis, the Chinese government seized the destroyed massive quantities of the opium in 1839. Britain's responded with military forces. The conflict became known as the First Opium War. Despite China's enormous size, Britain's modern navy proved overwhelmingly superior. After several years of fighting, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. The treaty opened Chinese ports for foreign trade, required large financial payments, and ceded Hong Kong to Britain. Although tea remained China's most famous export, Britain's leader had learned an important lesson. Relying on a single foreign supplier was simply too risky. If Britain wanted to secure its tea supply, it needed to grow tea within its own empire. That opportunity appeared in the remote hills of Assam in northeastern India. For years, botanists believed that tea could only grow in China, but in 1820s, Scottish explorer Robert Bruce learned that local communities in Assam had been drinking the tea made from native wild plants from generations. Scientists later confirmed that these plants belonged to a unique variety of a tea family. Britain immediately recognized the opportunity. The East India Company established vast plantations across Assam and later in Darjeeling, where the cool Himalayan climate produced teas with delicate flavors that are still prized today. Thousands of workers were recruited, many under harsh and exploiting conditions, to clear forest, plant tea bushes, and harvest the trend leaves by hand. Within a few decades, India had become one of the world's largest tea producers. Britain had finally broke the China centuries old monopoly. The story repeated itself in Ceylon, known today as Sri Lanka. During 1880s, the island's coffee industry collapsed after the devastating fungal disease destroyed nearly every plantation. Faced with economic disaster, Scottish planter James Taylor experimented with growing tea instead. His success transformed the island. Abandoned coffee estates were converted into endless fields of tea stretching across the mist covered hills. Today, Sri Lanka tea, still widely known as Ceylon tea, is recognized around the world for its bright flavor and exceptional quality. By the end of the 19th century, tea from India and Ceylon was flowing into Britain by a shipload, making tea more affordable than ever before. What had once been a luxury reserved for royalty had become an everyday drink enjoyed by ordinary families. The 20th century brought even more changes. In 1908, New York tea merchant Thomas Sullivan accidentally transformed the way millions of people prepared tea. He began spending tea samples to customers in small scale packets, expecting them to remove the leaves before brewing. Instead, many customers simply placed the entire bag into the hot water. The method was convenient, quick, and surprisingly effective. The modern tea bag was born. Combined with advances in packing, transportation, and global trade, tea became easier to prepare than ever before. By the mid 20th century, it had become a household staple across much of the world. Today, tea is grown in more than 60 countries, with China, India, Kenya, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam among the world's largest producers. From Japanese matchas and Chinese oolong to India's masala chai and British Earl Grey, every culture has adapted tea to its own traditions and taste. Despite these differences, they all share the same origin, a simple evergreen plant first cultivated thousands of years ago in the mountains of China. Yet the industry faces serious challenges. Climate change is altering rainfall patterns, increasing temperatures, they threatening many of the regions where high quality tea has been grown for centuries. Farmers are harvesting in sustainable agriculture, improving water management, and developing more resilient tea varieties to protect both their livelihood and the future of one of the world's favorite drinks. The next time you hold a warm cup of tea, remember that you are holding far more than a beverage. You are holding the legacy of ancient Chinese emperor and the Buddhist monk, the ambition of merchants who crossed oceans in search of fortune, the first, the rise of powerful trading companies that reshaped the global economy, the courage of explorers who carried tea across continents, the smugglers of plantation workers whose labor built a worldwide industry, a spark that helped ignite revolutions and wars that changed history. From a handful of leaves drifting into an empire pot of billions of cups enjoyed every single day, tea has traveled an extraordinary path through human civilization. Its story is one of discovery, culture, trade, conflict, and resilience. And with every cup poured today, that embark story continues, and one sip at a time. If you like this documentary of the history of tea, do like and subscribe to this channel for many more videos like this.